Recorded live on the turf at Mad Lab Training Studio in Eldersburg, Maryland. This is the Time to Win podcast with Alex and Dan. Now let's get this podcast started.
Yeah, like I show people this podcast and they're like, "Oh my God, that's so cool!"
Oh, that's awesome.
Like people. But I told people that I was going to do it, right? And I say a lot of stuff. I say a lot of stupid stuff, right? But I try.
I think that's why we get along.
Yeah, but game recognized game.
Game recognized game. I use that term all the time, actually.
So, I try really hard though, like to make good on the stuff that I say. Mm-hmm. For all the freewheeling and hubris and everything, like I really try hard to make good on stuff. And I try to hold back. I believe it or not, I actually am holding back a lot. Because I know I'll go out and I'll say the stupidest things in the world, right? And then I won't make good on it if I don't somehow filter it a little bit. So I try really hard to filter and yeah. So
I do understand that a lot.
Yeah.
Actually, you saying that, so sometimes when I really want to do something bad, like if I'm like, I want to do this, but I'm not sure I will do it, sometimes I'll just tell everybody because then I know that it'll make me do it. Sometimes.
Okay.
So I'll use that as a strategy, actually.
Okay. So they'll hold you to it, right?
Yeah.
You said, Dan,
right.
You were going to fill in the blank, right? Okay, so, the good news is I've got Brenda out there, right? And
that is
maybe Brenda needs a nickname for the blog.
She might.
For the podcast.
That is not for me to give her. I do not. Brenda is a saint.
Yeah.
She is the greatest person I know, and I would not want to make a mistake on a nickname and make her angry.
Yeah.
Because her wrath is something I can't handle.
No, me either, right? and if she gets mad at you, I'm going to pay the price on that one, right?
I don't want that either.
Yeah. But when I was working, before I retired, everybody knew everybody's spouses and families and kids and stuff, right? And Brenda's name was Sweet B. Okay, right.
That's awesome.
So Sweet B, right?
Sweet B, that's a good nickname.
Yeah, and I was the oldest guy in the group, so everybody called me Daddy Mac, right? So it's Daddy Mac and Sweet B. What are Daddy Mac and Sweet B doing this weekend?
That's hilarious.
Yeah. So.
Did she like the nickname?
She tolerated it.
That's fair enough.
But the reason I bring her into the podcast is that we're talking about saying stupid stuff, right? Mm-hmm. And trying to like filter it a little bit and make sure that you're not gonna say something with no intention of doing it. And this is what's great about Brenda. So endorsement number one, my wife, Sweet B, right, keeping the home fires burning. I can say all manner of stupid stuff to her, and she will just be like, she'll just like roll her eyes, or she won't even respond to me, right? It's a great filter.
I've seen it.
Yeah, I know, right? Like you see it because we both come over here sometimes. You see us in action, right? Dan, okay, so I was also thinking about like doing another endorsement, right? Like I'm wearing municipal, right?
Okay.
It's all over me. I'm wearing the camo sweats. I'm wearing the pink top. And I thought about endorsing it, but then I thought, Wahlberg doesn't need any more endorsement. That guy's a master at self-promotion, and he doesn't need my help. So, I'm
just... Is that whose brand it is?
Yeah, this is Mark Wahlberg, right?
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Actually, that's cool.
And so, we endorse people. We endorse Jocko, and we invite him to come on the podcast. I'm not going to endorse Wahlberg. He doesn't need my help.
But he does want to be on our podcast, I've heard.
Well, he can call us up and he can say so. All right, but
from a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend of a cousin.
Right, 6 degrees of separation from Mark Wahlberg. Right? Yeah, the 6 degrees of Mark Wahlberg. So Dan, I guess at this point we're rolling tape, and I had all these ideas, and so I wrote them down. I have a crib sheet today, right?
I love that.
So I brought my little side table here, and I've got my crib sheet.
So I saw the email, and then I opened it, and then I closed it right away because I was like, wait a minute.
Right. So I've been teasing you about a conversation I may or may not have
That's
had.
when I closed it because I started to read, and I was like, no.
Right, with Richard Branson, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. And, okay, so... Real quick then, before we get going, do you have any endorsements you want to check off real quick?
I always love to talk about my friends at CNA Auto.
Okay, right. Adam and CNA Auto.
That's right. If you Dukes of Hazzard ramp off something, jump over a taxi or a cop car, crash a vehicle, tire flies off, something gets on fire, or you just have some kind of minor engine trouble or something like that,
right?
I want you to go to my friends at CNA Auto. Tell them Dan sent you. Tell them that you're from Mad Lab, and tell them that you're here to see Adam. And Adam's going to hook you up with some of the best technicians, mechanics. Everybody over there is just salt of the earth. You're going to have a good experience and an honest experience. CNA Auto.
That's awesome. Okay, so since we're sticking with locals, right?
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and give a shout out to Dante over at Liberatories.
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Like, Dante sees opportunities. He's a man of the community. He's a man of the people. And if you guys were watching the live broadcast from the city council meetings, like Dante was just totally owning it. He came in well prepared. He knew what he wanted, and he got it done, right? And he communicated his message crystal clear. Hey,
Lisa, I will watch that episode. I will. I promise. I told her I would. So.
Yeah, okay. So that's kind of it. Those are the endorsements I had today. But Dan, last time we were here, we talked about, like, in your life, you're going to find yourself starting over, and you're going to find yourself sucking again, right? Like, you may be awesome today, but at some point, everybody's going to find themselves starting over and sucking again, right? And it's hard. It's starting over is too hard for most people, right? And what we did was we told everybody, you know what? It's okay to start over. It's okay to suck. It's okay to do this over and over again. Okay, it's okay to suck again, right? And the goal on any given day isn't really to, like, wake up one day and be great. The goal is simply to suck less, right? Like, we suck less. And anybody that, like, knows me from the days past, right, you'll recognize that. We suck less. That was the name of our axe throwing team once upon a time. We awesome. Suck less. Okay. But, that's what we talked about last time. And, it comes to mind, there's something else that's really, really hard. Like, starting over is hard, sucking again is hard, but there's something else that's really hard. And kids are great at this. They don't suck at this, but adults really suck at it, and that's asking for what you want. Okay? And if I had to hang a title on today's podcast, I'd call it Changing the World / Asking. Just ask, okay? Maybe that's the name of the podcast. I don't know. Or the name of today's episode is Just Ask, okay? So,
just ask. Change the world.
And so I'll just pause for a minute, and I'll ask you, is there anything you want to ask me about that? Or do you want to take it and run with it? Or do you want me to tell you about Richard Branson? Or what do you think?
Well, I think that's a really good point, because you talk to a ton of different people, and I think one of the big things about Just Ask is even just starting a business, right?
Okay.
How many people ever want to start a business?
I mean, everybody talks
lot,
about
right?
it. Right?
Everybody talks about it, but then very few actually take the steps to do it.
Right.
Because a lot of times people they'll just be like, oh, well, I don't know how to do that. Well, they won't ask for help, right? Or they'll be like, I don't have the capital to do X, Y, and Z. And I was like, well, no one's ever going to give you any capital to do these things unless you start talking about it. And then you start asking, right? And you're not going to be able to get help to start your business if you don't ask about it.
Right.
Same thing with simple stuff. Even if you're working at a job and you have a job within the company that you would like, don't just assume that you can't get that job for whatever. The first step would be people need to understand what you want.
Oh, man.
Right?
So important. Right?
And the only way to do that is to be vocal about it.
Yeah. I think it's also hard for people to even know what they want, right? So many people are just coasting in the status quo, and, maybe they assume, like, they'll get lucky, or a break will come their way, or something good will happen. But I think a lot of people don't know what they want, right?
Yeah, they just never really think about it. They get stuck in the day-to-day.
Yeah.
Right?
Like the goal today is just to survive, right?
They want to eat breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They want to go to sleep at a certain time.
Yeah.
Maybe they want to take a nap. If they have kids, they want their kids to survive the day without killing anybody else, right? So those are, like, simple things that should be happening regularly anyway. I think that people should start to set goals outside of that, and that becomes the problem.
Right. Yeah. Guys like us, we're not hoping just to get through the day, right? We're hoping to be great. We're hoping to suck less.
We're hoping to suck less.
So I promised you that I would talk to you about, or I would tease you a little bit about a conversation I may or may not have had with Richard Branson. Okay, and
all right.
and it plays right into our podcast topic.
I've been interested all week in this, so you've been having me hanging on forever.
So the very first time I was flying international for business, I was on British Airways. No, I was on Virgin. I was on Virgin, right? And, I knew it was going to kind of be a drag. It was going to, it was an overnight flight to London, and, I'd be uncomfortable, and I'd be, probably sleepless. And so I hit Richard Branson with a tweet, right? And I said, Sir Richard, you must upgrade me tonight. Do it, right? And I hit him a couple hours before I went to the airport, and I got nothing, right? So I hit him again, and I got nothing. And I hit him again and again and again. And I was just hammering Richard Branson for an upgrade. I was getting nothing, right? I mean, I must have sent him 50 tweets in a period of like 5 or 6 hours.
Does he own Virgin Airlines? He owns a lot of stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know who owns it, but I think he's certainly the face. Maybe he's the owner. I don't know.
Okay.
But so I have followers, back when it was Twitter and I was doing a lot of stuff on Twitter, I had followers, and they started picking up on this. And then, they start feeding Richard Branson like, you got to upgrade Alex. Come on, you hit him up. Do us a solid, Sir Richard, right? And pretty soon, I mean, I wouldn't call it viral, but, my 50 or 60 tweets turned into a couple thousand tweets, right?
Oh, my God.
and I received... I did not get the upgrade, okay? Okay, that's a...
Damn it.
Yeah, I know, but wait, it still has a happy ending, right?
All right, fair.
What happened was a couple of things. First of all, I got a DM from the account holder of Sir Richard, which I assume was Sir Richard, right? Or maybe his secretary. I don't know. But it's like, hey, Alex, thanks so much for all of your questions. It's been really interesting.
For all of your questions.
Yeah, it was really one question over and over again, right? Mm-hmm. But thanks for generating interest. It's actually PR for us, to see people interacting that way and reaching out that way. We're not going to upgrade you because that's just not how it works. Even though we could, we're not going to. But here's what's going to happen. Something nice will happen to you when you get on the airplane. Okay.
Oh.
And so I won on two levels, right? I got a call back, which I loved, right? I love the attention.
How would you not?
Yeah, and when I got on the plane, I got a bottle of wine.
It's hard to argue with.
Yeah, it was hard to argue with. And I was economy plus anyway, thanks to the company. So, I wasn't completely cramped. I wasn't back in the luggage or anything like that. So, but I asked, and that's the point, right? I asked for something that was not something I wanted and something that I was not necessarily going to get. Like, nobody's just going to say, oh, look at that nice guy in the pink hoodie. Let's give him an upgrade, right? It just doesn't work that way.
I will say, though, if you would have been wearing a Mad Lab shirt,
maybe
chances would have skyrocketed. I think. No offense, Mark Wahlberg, but
yeah. So Mark's not going to come on our podcast, but
I ruined that.
Maybe not. But so last night I was having beers with an old colleague of mine, David, and David works down at Emergent Biosolutions in Baltimore. He's like the general manager of their Baltimore facility, and he's done a complete turnaround down there. And we were talking, how did you do that? What did you do to get that turnaround done? And he said, I knew what I wanted, and I asked people to execute on it, right? And then he talked about the rules, right? And so many of the dumb questions that we ask in the world, or that we don't ask them because we think it's against the rules. Like
100%.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, run with that, Dan.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
No, you continue with what you're talking about, but I do agree, and I have, yeah.
So David and I have known each other for like 20 years. We worked together for many years, and we've remained friends after that. And we've both had pretty successful careers, but we got to where we were by abandoning the rules, right? Or at least questioning them, right? Like some rules you're not going to abandon, right? Like driving and stuff like that. There's a way to drive safely, like use your turn signal, floss every day, try to get 8 hours of sleep. Those are some pretty good rules, right? But there's a lot of rules that are out there that are really bad, and people don't think to challenge them, right? Like 100 years ago, 50 years ago, college athletes were discouraged from being in the weight room because coaches would say, you're going to get muscle bound, right? And now it's like, at some point somebody stopped doing this. Somebody said, that's the stupidest thing I've ever heard.
Yeah.
That rule is going in the waste can, right? Because it's a bad rule, right? And And so, we always have to be challenging these things. And kids do this without even thinking about it, right?
All the time.
Like, especially teenagers, right? They're starting to get a sense of the world. I mean, 2-year-olds do it too. All the kids do it. And I don't know.
My sister just called me yesterday because her daughter did it.
Yeah.
And then she was very upset because she thought she was raising her wrong. And I'd be like, well, shouldn't have yelled at her teacher, Rory. Shouldn't have yelled at her teacher. However, she's 5,
right,
and she's a willful little girl, which is tough on the short term. But I think she's being raised right, and she's a nice little girl that tries to help people around her. I think being a willful little girl will be better in the long run, right? Because then she's going to not just go with the norms of society. She's going to buck back. And she probably didn't need to yell at her teacher, but that's like, some of that stuff is part of it, and then they learn back and forth. But I think one of the keys to what you said, and I think why you see it in youth, is because it's natural for children to kind of try to test authority and buck authority, and that's an important skill. And then it becomes sometimes I think that parents will just be like, okay, they're bucking authority, we know that they do that, we're just going to stomp that out.
Yeah.
Which is a fine line, because if you do stomp that out, then they do become kind of like a drone, and then they won't ask for what they want.
Right.
And then they go through life without getting what they want because they never asked. They thought they were supposed to follow these specific society rules that may or may not exist also.
Yeah. Dan, a lot of cultures around the world reward and value conformity, right? Mm-hmm. Our culture here in the U.S. does not, right? We reward and we praise the individual as the nonconformist. I mean, that's part of the American character, right? Challenge the status quo. Do not, rewrite the rules, okay? Right? And that's one of the things I love is rewriting the rules. And in our first podcast, we talked about suffering and what's going to happen if you, the grief that's going to come to you if you rewrite the rules. But, maybe this podcast is like, if you do rewrite the rules and you're willing to suffer through it, you're going to change the world, right? And, okay, so a couple of examples, right? So I asked Sir Richard for the upgrade. I didn't get it, right? But I got a bottle of wine. Because I asked the dumb question, right? By the way, if I had a nickname or if I had like a Marvel superhero persona, I would be the guy that asked the dumb questions, right? That's my superpower.
It's a pretty good power, underrated, I would say.
So I retired recently, right? And I wanted to get a little bit of recognition, and so I asked for it. And because it wasn't coming, it wasn't. It makes no sense to camp out at the mailbox and wait for recognition to flow in. You kind of have to ask for it. So I sent a letter to the White House, and I said, "Hey, this guy Alex, right?" I was writing like it wasn't me. I said, "This guy Alex, he just retired after 35 years in the business, and he did all these things, and he helped all these people. You should write him a thank you note or a congratulations note." And then I promptly forgot about it.
How did you write them like a letter through the mail, or did you write an email to some staff member? And if you did you do it from like a different? What name did you put on there?
Okay, so here's the fun thing. So I used the word mail, right? But I communicated with the White House, right? Mm-hmm. And it turns out the White House has this form that you can fill out, and it goes over to the president's staff, and they uptake it. And, oh, so and so did this great thing, or so and so just got a Nobel Prize, or so and so started podcasting with Dan, and and the staffers over at the White House will filter through that, and they'll pass some, go through different layers, and eventually wind up, somewhere in the president's office or close to it, right?
Right.
So I asked for it, right? I went online, I found the form, I filled out the form, and I submitted it, right? And I gave all the contact information for this guy named Alex, right? As if that wasn't me doing it. And 6 weeks later, I got a card from the White House saying, "Hey, Alex, congratulations on your recent retirement. Thanks for everything you've done. XOXO, hugs and kisses, Joe and Jill." Right? I mean, I'm paraphrasing.
Right.
But you got to ask for it, right? And that like really, you're going to ask the President of the United States to thank you? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
I've never heard of anybody doing that.
I know,
actually.
right?
That's awesome.
So here we are, cutting new ground, live from the turf.
Live from the turf.
But you got to ask for these things, right? So I had another example. Okay, so I was working the drug business, and we were actually manufacturing morphine sulfate. Okay, so kind of a dangerous drug, highly controlled by the DEA, and they've got a process out there that says we're only going to allow so much morphine to be manufactured in the United States because that's how big the market is, and we don't want a lot of surplus morphine floating around, right?
Yeah, that would make sense.
They have this thing called the quota system, right? And you have to, before you can even purchase it, you have to provide evidence that you have a quota, right? And so we sent to the DEA, we sent them a letter saying, hey, we need to revise our quota for the year, right? And nothing happened, right? And our customers are like, what's going on with the supply here? Why aren't you guys making this drug? You know, and we'd say, well, we haven't got the quota letter yet. And so it went on and on and on. And like the business was beginning to suffer. And the CEO of the company comes and says, what are you going to do about this? And I said, okay, here's what I'm going to do. I've tried to reach out to the DEA. That didn't work. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to call up like my 2 senators, my representative, and the governor, and I'm going to call them up and I'm going to ask them to put some heat on the DEA. Wow. Really? You're going to do that, right? And so I did. I sent a letter to let's see here. I know Ben Cardin was the one of the senators at the time. I can't remember the other one because he never wrote back to me, right? And Chris Van Hollen was our representative for the district, and I think Larry Hogan was the governor. And you know, I complained. Like, we're trying to run a business here, Senator Cardin, or Governor Hogan or whoever, right? And the DEA is holding us back. Can you shake them down a little bit for us, right? Oh, and by the way, we're the largest employer in Baltimore County, or second largest employer in Baltimore County, and these are registered voters whose livelihoods depend on the continuity of business. Help us out. And Senator Cardin, and here in my hand, I have a copy of the letter that Senator Cardin sent me back saying, hey, Alex, we investigated the DEA. We shook them down a little bit for you, and attached is the results of our investigation. Hope this is to your satisfaction, right? And the next day, we got our quota letter from the DEA, right?
Awesome.
So I asked, right? It was the dumbest thing in the world. Really, you're going to ask a senator of the United States government to like shake someone down in the government for you? Yeah, that's what I'm going to do, right? It's just ask the dumb question, that like the impermissible question, right? Just ask it.
What do you think it is? Do you think it is something like? So there's 2 different avenues of thought for me. With that, it's either one, people don't want to take the time to ask because they feel like it's not worth the time because most likely the answer is going to be no. 2, it's not a societal norm. It is kind of against the rules. They'll feel like they'll be vilified or like made fun of in some way for even doing that.
Right.
Or 3, that they're going to take the time to do it and they're not sure what, or they're probably going to get a no and they can't handle actually getting a negative response.
Yeah.
I'm 3, actually.
Yeah, I'm glad you asked that, Dan, because I know in my case, it came from a couple of things. My willingness to ask the dumb question came from, I'm not afraid to get beaten down because it's kind of a lifestyle for me, right? I know what I want, and I'm going to ask for it. Okay, and the third thing is I had all these demanding bosses that were like, this is your area. You have to fix this, right? You have to deal with this. It's time to win, right? Time to win.
Time to win. That's a phrase you love. Time to win, Dan.
Hey, maybe that's the name of the podcast, right? Like, we've been through a couple of
Time to win.
Yeah, maybe the name of the podcast is Time to Win.
Could be. I kind of do like that, actually.
Winning Time with Dan and Alex. Right? Wait a second. I think there's already a copyright on Winning Time, right? Isn't that the
Who knows?
The Lakers documentary that was our docu-fiction, something,
I have no
docudrama,
idea.
right? Winning Time. And so, but I had all these demanding people that were in my life, like with the DEA thing. Like,
for sure,
you have to figure this out, right?
Sounds like a pretty high pressure job.
Oh,
too.
dude, it was so intense. I mean, I'm so glad to be retired.
Right.
But yeah, they were not willing to accept no, right? And that's a really good lesson in life. Like, never accept the first no. This is one of the things I told people when they're working with customers and and stuff. Or when they're trying to figure out their own life. Like, there's an obstacle in front of you. It's called no. Okay? Do not accept the first no. Okay? All right, you getting that, kids? Right? Like, never accept the first no. Yeah, you have to say why, or you have to say, could we try it this way? Maybe if, right? We do those things, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and we negotiate, right? We negotiate with ourselves and with our bosses and with our spouses, and I think we need to teach people never accept the first no. Right?
How do you do that?
I mean, man, Dan, if I knew that, I'd be buying lottery tickets and stuff, right? But I don't. I don't know how you teach it. I just know that somehow, like, I got sick of getting turned down all my life, right? Like, if I had ever accepted the first no, I'd never be married, right? Because I think the first interaction I had with Brenda was like, no way. So, but here we are, almost 40 years later, we're still married. But I didn't accept the first no, or maybe she didn't accept it. I don't know. But how do you teach it? I don't know. Maybe you do a podcast and you just get the stuff out there and you say things like, it's okay to suck again. It's okay to ask the dumb question. It's okay to fail as long as you keep trying, right?
Yeah.
And it's okay if somebody says no to you. Just dig in and go again, right?
So one of the things that we talked about in the first time that we sat down, so we didn't even podcast. We just were doing like a sample to see like how things would go back. We talked about like creating a society.
Yeah, that's right.
Which is always something that I've been very interested in, even if somehow, like if I was given a bunch of money to just start a section of area where there was going to be X amount of homes or whatever, like I've always thought about like how I would want some of that stuff to go, right? And stuff that I would want people to learn and like what characteristics I'd want from people. And we went over some of that stuff. But I think there's some things, this is very obvious, but there's some things that I think need to be taught at a younger level and I think should be taught in the school system as well. And I feel like that's one of them. I just don't, like, what would that look like? Because it wouldn't just be like a class on not accepting the first no. It would be a class maybe on like asking questions and appropriately pushing boundaries, right? Maybe where you're like, all right, just because somebody says this, people that made these rules are just human, just like you and I, right? However, maybe there's like a moral ground that everything should be looked at, or like, right? So like maybe there's some values that are put in there, and as long as things match the value, then we start looking at, all right, but so then these rules, maybe they're there for a place, but you should at least try to argue them and see why they're there. Somebody should explain to you why you can't do. If like somebody should explain to me why I need to stop at a stop sign. It should be pretty obvious, but like as long as you know why, it makes everything easier to do. And then you are more apt to ask questions. And then if you know the answers, then you're more also apt to follow those rules all the time, right? If you get a good, satisfactory answer.
So Dan, that's great. When we go out after this podcast today and we start building that new society, right? Maybe that's the name of the podcast, The New Society, with Dan and Alex, right?
That's it.
I don't know. But
that is one of my unreasonable goals, though.
Okay. No.
I'm going to find a way around that.
Good for you. But Dan, in our society, when we rebuild this thing and when we make utopia for ourselves, one of the things that I would like to see is that rather than a population that has blind obedience to the rules, I want a population that understands the rules, right? Like, okay, the sign says stop, so you stop. But you don't stop because the sign says so. You stop because there's traffic coming. And if you don't stop, you might get run over, right?
And you understand that.
Right. And that's the difference between obedience and understanding, right?
I think that's a great way to say that. Yeah, so the difference between, that might be the class.
The
difference between obedience and understanding. Right. I think that that's another issue, is like people that want people to conform or want people that are obedient are a couple of negative traits, right? Maybe all together, maybe just one another. One, probably tyrannical in nature, which is not going to be good, right? Very insecure, so it's controlling. Or just lazy and don't want to have to deal with questions. Any one of those things. And probably a combination of those things.
Yeah. I mean, obedience is good at some level sometimes, right? Like, I don't care. I don't care to understand this particular rule.
Right.
I just know that my life is going to be a little easier if I follow it. So I'm not even. It's not. It's
or
not
if somebody's brain's developing, right? If you have like a 2-year-old and you don't want them to be in the middle of the road and be asking why while they're in the middle of the road,
right?
Like get out of the road and then we'll talk about it.
Then we'll talk about it, right?
Right. Yeah, I've had that conversation with Jack.
Obey me first, and then I will help you understand. Right? Yeah. So obedience versus understanding. That's I think a really important thing. And maybe the people that ask or that challenge that first no, or the people that ask the dumb question, it's because they know there's something more to it. They actually understand the problem a little better. They're not going to obey because they understand why that rule is there, and they understand why they're different, right? They understand.
And they probably had some success with that before.
Okay, yeah. I mean, certainly in my life, I have, right? I've had a lot of success. I shouldn't say it this way. People get the wrong idea. I've had a lot of success breaking the rules. It's not the message I want to send, but I've had a lot of success saying, I don't understand why this rule is in place. I don't understand why we have to do it this way. I believe my situation is different, right? This is me talking in context, right? Like, I believe that my situation is different, therefore I want an upgrade, right? Sir Richard, you must, right? I believe our situation here is a little bit different, and it needs some interference on behalf of elected officials, right?
Which is also another interesting thing, because I'd like to know what percentage, or if it is like a human condition thing, where everybody always thinks that their situation is different. Mm-hmm. Because technically your situation is different from anybody else's anyway.
Yeah.
Right? And we're all supposedly the main character in our own stories. Supposedly, if we're not in a simulation.
Geez, Dan, I'm making myself the main character in everybody else's story all the time.
Yeah, you did it to our podcast. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, help me, Brenda.
Alex is the star of our podcast.
Help me, Brenda.
The unwilling star of our podcast.
Not me.
I will say. 100%.
Dan.
But I wonder that, and I wonder, and then I always wonder, does everybody think that way? Does everybody think that they're specifically different, or is there a group of people that think that they're in line with whatever? Because I know people act different ways,
right?
But do they actually think that, or are they just constantly have fallen into a day-to-day of conformity and part of them still rebels against that?
Yeah, maybe it comes back to am I getting what I want? Am I getting what I need? Right? And if yes, maybe I don't need to challenge the rules so much, right? Okay, I've got a roof over my head, I got a hot meal, I got some money in the bank, everything's cool. I don't need to challenge the rules, right? But if you want something to change and there's stuff in your way, you have to find a way to remove it. You need to find a way to either work around it or work with it or something. But you got to change something if you find that the obstacles are between you and your goals, right? And maybe your goals are misaligned. Maybe you need to change your goals. That's a good thing to ask. Are my goals appropriate? Are they relevant? Are they legal? I don't know. But if the answer to all of those things is still yes, and you've got obstacles, then you need to ask yourself, what am I going to do about it, right? How am I going to change things, right? And that's kind of what I teed up at the beginning of the podcast, right? Change the world, ask the question, just ask, right?
Do you think some of it comes from? So I keep coming back from why this would start.
Mm-hmm.
What would make you challenging the societal norm, mm-hmm. right? What would make me challenge the societal norm? What would make anybody do that? And is it something where it's all right, it's a normal thing for children to do this, and some children have some success, and then they have a little bit more success, and then they're more apt to do that? And then maybe some children are just squashed down with it right away and don't get any success that way. So then they're oh, well, I better just do this and grow up that way. Or is it a personality trait? Or is it like relative to like however they feel at the time? So is it somebody that's like has to deal with an X amount of suffering and they rebel against that because they're just not happy and not comfortable, so then they feel like they have to do something different? Or is it something where like maybe you don't have like those giant successes or anything, or even maybe those small successes, but you read a lot and you read about them, so you know it's possible, and you have mentors, you have people around you that you've seen do these things. Like, would that be the same thing? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
like,
it makes perfect sense, Dan. I again, like so many of the questions you ask me, I don't know the answer.
Well, I want answers, Alex.
Yeah. But I think it still stems from, like, why do kids break their rules, right? Because they want something, right? I want a cookie out of the cookie jar, right? Therefore, I'm going to go bust into the cookie jar and liberate the cookies, right?
Yeah, liberate. I like that.
The kids want something, right? And they're willing to make an effort to get it, right? And they're willing to remove obstacles, right? Sometimes you get squashed down for that. But I think everybody's got an inherent drive to win, okay? And most people don't know how, but they know that if I want to win, I'm going to have to do something. I'm going to have to work for it. I'm going to have to, like, go into the gym, or I'm going to have to go to school, or I'm going to have to work, or I'm going to have to address an issue in my life, right? If I want to win, I'm going to have to go after these obstacles.
You're going to have to go through some adversity.
Yeah, and if you don't, you're not going to win, right? Okay, I think really it's just that simple. And I think if Jocko were here, he'd say, "Yup, spot on." Right? If you want to win, you're going to have to go through. You're going to have to remove obstacles, right? And I think that's really what that just ask is. How do I remove these obstacles? Right? It doesn't have to be like a belligerent thing or something negative. It's just like, okay, this thing is in my way. How do I fix this, right?
Yeah, I don't feel like any of your examples were negative.
Okay, so maybe I've got one. I don't know.
Negative example?
For better or for worse. This one, okay, so, when I was growing up, my dad was a lawyer, and, he was into, for whatever reason, he got involved with a really interesting bunch of guys, right? And he ended up working for a guy named Sandy Weil. Okay, so have you ever heard of Citigroup, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so Sandy Weil created Citigroup, right?
Oh, wow, okay.
And he created it with Jamie Dimon, who's now like the guy over at J.P. Morgan, right? And then there was a guy named Chuck Prince that was there. And my dad worked for these guys, right? So, Sandy Weil and Jamie Dimon and Chuck Prince, they were like household names, and, I knew who they were and occasionally saw them. Certainly my dad talked about them all the time because he spent all day with them. And, what they wanted to do was they wanted to merge the commercial banking industry with the insurance banking industry.
Sure.
Okay, right? Because, why? Because there's a lot of money there. Right?
Yeah.
But there was an obstacle in their way, and the obstacle was called the Glass-Steagall Banking Act of 1933. Okay, you getting all this, guys? It's turned into a banking history lesson. The Glass-Steagall.
I think everybody should know the history of banks, not because banking is that interesting, but I think banking runs more things than anybody will ever probably know.
Okay, so it's good to know a little bit about it.
It is good to know a little bit about it, no matter what your goals are.
So the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933 created a boundary, a separation between commercial banking and insurance banking, right? For whatever reason, right? And, Sandy Weil and his people were like, okay, here we are. We're
probably for checks and balances.
Yeah, no doubt, right? For control against crazy financial practices that would harm the economy, right? At least in 1933, right? That was the reasoning behind it, and so they figured out that they wanted to do this. They wanted to merge, what was it, Primerica with Travelers Group, right? Okay. And one of them was a commercial lending operation. One of them was an insurance company, right?
Primerica's insurance banking? Right?
I don't know.
No?
I don't know. Right? But this is what they were trying to do, or maybe it was Travelers and Smith Barney or something. Right? They're trying to bring together these two entities, and the regulations prohibited that. So they're like, okay, great. So we have to change the law. We're not going to break it, but we're going to change the law. And they started working with like the Secretary of the Treasury and the International Monetary Fund and the Federal Reserve Banks and Congress and the President, and they spent years doing this, and they got the law changed, right? And people were printing money. They made so much money. They made tens of billions of dollars for their companies, maybe hundreds of billions of dollars, right? But they saw this obstacle, and history may not be kind to that process. I'm not sure. A lot of people in the rearview mirror say, "Oh yeah, well that led to the financial meltdown of 2007."
It could, huh?
Yeah, I don't know, but yeah, at the time though, these guys were like, "Okay, this is an impossible situation and an impossible obstacle in front of us, but we have to remove it." So, can we do that? And they said, yeah, we can do that. We can figure it out. Here's a roadmap. Let's create a way to do this. And they figured it out. And it blows my mind. Like, to me, that's
they think
like,
so that is the difference, right?
Yeah.
It's like if something like a law, you're like, oh, we can't do that. But then they go, well, we just need to change the law.
Yeah.
Right? It's just like, oh, well, there's like this mile-high wall in front of you, right. And someone would be like, that's impossible at first. And then the other person's like, oh, we just need to shorten it a bit. Or we just need to find a way to climb it.
Right.
Or we have to find a way to run through it. Like it's...
Or guys like you and me might say, oh, look, there's a door over there. Let's go through it, right?
Head first.
I mean, let's just turn the knob and open the door and go through it, right?
I don't know if that sounds like you would do that.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'd get to that point. So I'd follow you through, though.
Uh-huh.
I'd probably try to go through the hardest part of the wall with my head.
Yeah.
Would likely be my first.
All right, so it's good to have a guy like you on the team. Okay, it's good to have
I don't know if that's true.
It's good to have some muscle on the team. It's good to have some brains on the team. Unfortunately, I don't have either. But like I said,
me neither.
I'm the guy that you want on the team to ask the dumb questions, like, hey, what's this door over here? Can we just try that? Maybe you need somebody like that on the Dungeons and Dragons campaign.
Maybe,
right? Like just.
Oh, we have plenty of people to ask the dumb questions. That is for sure.
Yeah,
I get questions coming at me from all different sides.
Yeah, so
it's a hilarious process.
Yeah, so maybe when we rebuild society, like Dungeons and Dragons is going to be on the curriculum. Like
I'll tell you two things I would not have, and I know it's kind of a whatever take, but two things that I would not have as they exist now in our society would be banks and insurance agencies. I think insurance is such an interesting thing to me because it just any insurance, like, and I do understand, like, over time, they've like cemented themselves into whatever, like, whatever the insurance is, mm-hmm. right? However, to me, it reminds me of like an old school shakedown, where it's like somebody comes up to you and we're sitting here and somebody comes in and goes, hey, you guys don't have insurance for your place. And I'm like, what are you talking about? They're like, you need insurance for your property here. And I'd be like, what are you talking about? And then they break my window. Yeah. And they go, you need insurance. That's what it reminds me of.
Right.
And otherwise there's no way. An insurance agency to me shouldn't be like 80% profitable. Like, that is so crazy to me. And then, I could go on about this forever. And banks, talking about just like making their own money. It seems like they just make up their own rules and laws and stuff to make them more and more and more money. And then all of a sudden there's a giant financial issue and they have almost nothing happens to them, where lots of happens to the rest of the community around them.
Yeah. So Dan, this is why crowdsourcing exists, right? Because people are like, I don't want to deal with a bank. I need some money. Let me ask. Let me just ask.
Yeah.
Hey, can I get some money from you? I'm trying to start a business. I don't need $1 million. I mean, I do. I need $1 million, but I don't need it from you, Dan. I need $20 from you. I need $5 from you.
Done.
Right? But because if you ask 1 billion people, right? And, 1 billion times anything is a very big number.
It is a very big
right?
number.
So all you got to do is ask. And I think that's, if you don't like something, and I think this is where we start wrapping up the episode, right? Like, if you don't like something, you have to ask the dumb question, right? It's the only way to win is to ask, right? May I please win? No, you may not. Why not? Why not? Well, because of the Glass-Steagall Act of 1933. Now I understand. Now
the
I understand.
obstacle. How do we get through the obstacle?
Exactly.
How are we going to change your life? How are you going to change the world? How
Yeah.
are you going to win?
Yeah. How are you going to win? And I think the first thing you got to do is, once you decide you want to win, then you ask the dumb question: How? How am I going to win?
Well, I love that.
Yeah, and okay, so maybe that's the take-home message today. Took us 45 minutes to get there, right? But we asked a bunch of dumb questions.
I asked a bunch of dumb questions. You're full of answers over there.
I'm not. I'm just
Alex.
Dan, I'm not full of answers. I'm just full of dumb stories from my life, right? Any success I've had in my life is built on a mountain of failure, right? So if you want to know how to win, just ask, right? And I'll tell you all the things that you shouldn't do. Okay.
That's fair. Alex, once again, you're the man.
Dan, I'm not the man. I'm just a man.